Hello, I'm Lisa Taylor. Welcome to the program. Put your name, well, not your name, but put where you're watching from down below so I can see where you are. And I just want to say thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure, and I absolutely love talking about spiritual ideas and, putting it out there. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being part of the audience and listening and watching and making comments. So anyway, I wanted to come on and talk to you tonight about, that story in the Bible. I read the Bible lesson. I think a lot of you in this community probably read the Bible lesson, the Christian Science Bible lesson, and I always get so much out of it. And I always like it when the story about the dead man being carried out on the bier, right, and Jesus stopping the bier. I always like this story because when we stop the bier, when we stop the sort of processional that's heading towards death, it's something that we can do in our lives. It is acknowledging that what this picture is showing us, death, is not the reality. If Jesus saw a dead man being carried out, he wouldn't have stopped the bier. He probably would have gotten in line with the processional and just walked towards the graveyard, right? But Jesus stopped the bier. Why? Because he saw life. He saw the possibility of the reality of this man's life and his being and his nature. He didn't see a dead guy being carried out on a bed. He saw life. So how many times in our lives do we feel like something is dying? Do we feel like there's this death toll, this death march towards the end of something, the end of a relationship, the end of a job, the end of a living situation, where it feels like it's all going to ruin and we need to kind of get in line with everybody else who sees it going to ruin? Do we question it? Do we stop the bier? Do we say, hang on, there's something else going on here, and I'm not going to buy into the story that everyone is saying and everyone is believing. I'm going to see it differently. I'm going to see life where others are seeing death. I'm going to see health where others are seeing sickness. I'm going to see possibility where others are seeing limitation and lack. Let's see what's true and what's real in the absolute sense of the word. What is God seeing? When Jesus stopped the bier, he was seeing what God was seeing. He was seeing life and woke the guy up, said, rise up and walk, right? Rise up. And he sat up and started to speak, right? And then he returned to his family. So when we see the death knoll happening, we see the death march happening in our lives in whatever form that's taking for you. And then only you know what that is. But think of something in your life right now. Just take a moment. Think of something in your life right now that is dying, that is kind of going past its time and dying, where there's no life in it. Like maybe it's your creative juices. Maybe it's your desire to succeed or create something. Maybe it's your affection for your partner. Maybe it's the desire to play with your children or go out and do activities and go out into nature. Whatever it is, think about that thing in your life right now that's dying. The belief of death is around. And ask yourself, are you willing to stop the bier? Are you willing to see it differently? Are you willing to question whether or not death is a reality in that sense? Death is just a belief. It's a suggestion. It's not the reality. So are you willing to see that death is a suggestion and not a reality in whatever it was that you chose? Are you willing to think in terms of possibility and see this in terms that God sees it in? Are you willing to look through spiritual eyes? There's a quote in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. I quote this book all the time because it's just so darn good. So there's a quote, and it's actually in the lesson this week, where Mrs. Eddy says, the struggle for the recovery of invalids goes on, not between material methods, but between mortal minds and immortal mind. I want to dive into that for just a minute. Because what we do many times when there's kind of the death sentence on something in our life is we start trying to figure out solutions in the context of mortal mind. We look inside that context of death or destruction or end or lack or whatever the death version looks like for you, right? And we look inside that context and we try to weigh and measure options within mortal mind's conception of things. Which one is better? Which one is worse? But it's still within mortal mind's concept. It's still within that false ego's representation of what's going on. And now we know that the false ego, that false sense of ego, that egoic consciousness, right? The whole basis of that is separate from the divine, separate from source, lack mentality, limitation mentality. It all is leading towards death, right? So in the context of mortal mind, if you're weighing your options within that context, ultimately it's going to stay in the death march. It's heading in that direction. What we need to be doing is looking in immortal mind's options. What does immortal mind say about the circumstance? Does immortal mind even see the death march? No, immortal mind sees life, possibility, infinite abundance, infinite possibility, infinite intelligence. It sees everything good and possible. So as this quote says, the battle, the struggle, right, for recovery is not between material methods. It's not within like which method in matter am I going to choose. It's between mortal mind, that false view, and immortal mind. Really diving into that place in thought that is filled with the divine, filled with spiritual perception, spiritual intuition, the spiritual view, the reality of the circumstance. And that exists in thought. So that battle is in that moment when you're choosing between the mortal view and the immortal view. That's where the battle sits. It's not in the circumstances and trying to find the solution in the circumstances. The battle is being waged in your thought. And which story are you going to choose? Are you going to choose the mortal one, or are you going to choose the immortal one? And that's where the battle sits. So the more we focus on the immortal, real nature of things, the more we see the possibility of the divine expressed, the more our experience will reflect that. So if our thought is dwelling on death, ultimately death, right? Limitation, lack, death, sickness, sin, disease. If that's what our thought is focused on, we know it's a law of the universe. What you focus on expands. Where you place your thought, your experience will follow, because your experience is the extension of your thought. That's what's going on here. Quantum physics tells us that all the time. So I don't want to keep going. I keep going longer and longer. Okay, so to sum up, when the death march is occurring in your life, in whatever form that's taking, stop the Bier. Stop the Bier and stop looking at mortal mind's options. Turn that off, turn away from that, deny that, and turn towards what does immortal mind say here? What are the possibilities? What's the reality that I see when I put on my immortal mind glasses and I look through that spiritual lens? What reality do I see? The real, the good, the divine, God expressed reality. And fill your thought with that, because winning that battle of where you're placing your thought, that's the first step to seeing the healing, seeing the real being expressed in your life. If you don't look for it, you're not going to see it. So stop the Bier and start looking for what immortal mind is telling you. Okay. Don't forget to share this if you like what you hear, if you like these videos. This actually is a little bit of a repeat of what came out in Morning Metaphys this morning. Not a repeat, but it's a very scaled down version. But Morning Metaphys has been really rich recently. And if you're not on my email list, get on my email list, because a lot of times I'll send those out just because I think they're so amazing, and I'll send them out to everybody on the list. So if you want to get on my email list, just PM me or something, and I'll put you on the list if you're not already on there. All right, lots of love, you guys. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Be well.